This is Monica Perez here with Richard Booth, whom many of you may have heard being interviewed on a variety of podcasts about his extensive work on the Oklahoma City bombing, which has been totally cataloged on the Libertarian Institute, right? Is that right?
Yeah, on libertarianinstitute.org/OKC.
Hi, Richard. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Fine, thank you. And what I was realizing is how much material there is on this subject. And I was trying to think of something a little different from what you've talked about with people before, but you really have covered it all. And I couldn't even begin to get through all of the work that you've already done. But but it's been almost 30 years since the Oklahoma City bombing, and I'm really have to resist the temptation to be like, and then there was the World Trade Center 93, and then there was 9/11, and then there was the Patriot Act, and then there was the free, I can't. It's better to take it one step at a time. And I think a lot of people, I mean, it's 30 years, so I remember it. You're younger than I am, and you remember it, but people younger than you probably don't really have that vivid a memory. And then you have a very specific reason why it caught your eye. So I want to start from the beginning, but I really want to ask you a little bit of personal stuff very briefly because you're so good at this. You've done so much research. I want to know, like, where do you find the time? Where did you get the skills? You like obviously have gotten the knack of recognizing, like, what's an intelligence operation. I mean, it's really amazing what you've accomplished. And can you tell me a little bit about yourself without, like, doxing yourself or where you work, but, like, a little bit about your education and why you're interested in this and what your day job is?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. Um, basically, this is a subject that I've been interested in for a very long time, but I didn't really start to do active research until about 2016, 2017, where I started to get very serious about it. And my interest stems from the fact that we don't know who this, John Doe 2 figure is, and that goes all the way back to kind of when it happened. My personal interest too, in terms of, you mentioned like intelligence operations, that sort of thing. I've always been interested in, like, I read all those memoirs, like when, like, Spy Handler by Victor Cherkashin, who was like
Yeah, Philip
KGB
Agee.
president, Philip Agee, his books. Yeah, I just read all of those books and have for quite a long time. And so you kind of build up this pool of understanding on the subject matter and correlate all the material. As far as like my day job, it's pretty boring. I'm an office worker. I'll put it at that. Um,
But
and
you
and
didn't turn out to be a journalist or any of that, like, or maybe, you know what I mean? Like, it's just you're analytical, you're discerning, you're confident, like you sound like a professional, but I guess it's just because you've really put so much into this. You're what I would call a gentleman scholar.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
I want to relate to people the things that I think would be compelling to them, is I believe what was compelling to me will be compelling to other people. And this is just a matter of, like you mentioned, there are so many people nowadays who like, this is not within their frame of reference. It happened before they were born. They may not know much about it. And when you do look at it and you just look at some of the key details, it really jumps out at you as, whoa, there's something else going on here. There's more than this McVeigh and Nichols guys.
I mean, it's undeniable, really.
Uh-huh.
So I mean, I could pull on, at least 100 threads. I could probably say, well, what about this guy? What about that guy? What about this? So, but because I don't think it's like in the forefront of people's minds, why don't you tell what the kind of official narrative is? And, feel free to interject or then get into what you think are the biggest problems with that. And we can go from there if you don't mind.
Absolutely. I'd love to kind of lead your listeners through that. And as I describe the official narrative, I might have like an additional fact or something I'll mention as it relates to our understanding of it outside of that narrative. And so the official narrative, which in large parts of it are very true. It's just that it leaves out so much. And so that narrative states basically that on April 19th, 1995, Timothy McVeigh delivered a truck bomb to the Murrah building. Um, and set it off, blew up at 9:02 a.m., killed 168 people, brought down about two-thirds of the building. He fled the scene after doing so. Now, the feds allege that he delivered this bomb and fled the scene alone. However, when you then go look at all of the FBI 302 reports or grand jury testimony or witnesses who were interviewed, every single one of them saw McVeigh with another person in that Ryder truck. So it's interesting that their narrative excludes this person. So as we go along, McVeigh basically was driving on the freeway in a car, a Mercury Marquis, which had no license plate on it. This aroused the suspicion of a police officer, highway patrol officer, who pulled him over for the not having a plate. And McVeigh at that time had his pistol in a shoulder holster, and it could be seen with his windbreaker on that the officer could tell he had a weapon. McVeigh told the officer that he was armed, and so this is interesting behavior from a person who you think just murdered 168 people,
I
right?
mean, no plate is the most rookie mistake. My
Right.
father's like, especially like we would watch old shows and he'd say, "Why are they speeding away from the crime scene? Like, be cool.
That's
Don't do
right.
anything stupid." What no plate? What could even explain that?
That's right. And what's interesting is witnesses who'd seen this vehicle described it. There are a couple who described seeing it with the license plate was hanging on one bolt. And it causes you to, of course, maybe conclude that when maybe it fell off. But then you also have the official narrative coming from McVeigh and Nichols, where they are stating that McVeigh intentionally took it off the vehicle when because he had left it in this alley. Uh, for a few days in Oklahoma, and he didn't want anyone running the plate or finding that it was linked to him. So he removes it, but then he never does put it back on before fleeing. And you would think a person who's doing a task like this would absolutely put a license plate on there.
What
Uh,
vehicle was this?
this was the Mercury Marquis. It was
Right.
like a
Okay.
1977 Mercury
Right.
Marquis.
Okay.
Yeah. And so he basically is then taken into custody because he was concealing his firearm in Oklahoma and he didn't have a concealed carry permit. So what he was doing was illegal. So is driving without a license plate. You probably would be let go if you didn't have this concealed weapon. So he's brought in on those charges, and he's actually about to be um, arraigned and potentially could post bail when the feds eventually get onto him, which is a couple days after his arrest, right? So he's arrested on the 19th. It's not for a couple days that they really know who he is. What happens then is that on April, I want to say, I think it was the morning of the 21st, the FBI has a press conference hosted by Weldon Kennedy, the special agent in charge, and he holds up two sketches that the FBI has produced of two suspects in the bombing. And he says that the FBI has identified that there are two males associated with this. Now, they knew enough to be able to say that because by that point in time, the FBI had in their custody surveillance camera recordings, which would have confirmed and given them enough information to say that where they could actually say, we know for sure there were two males associated with this vehicle because they have that on tape. Now, in addition to that, they had gone to all of the various body shops and properties in Kansas, um, the places around Elliot's body shop and the motels. The reason they did that is they found the axle from the Ryder truck at the bomb scene, and they're able to trace that to Elliot's body shop in
Oh.
Kansas, right? So they go there, they find it's a small place, maybe only one or two customers a day. So these employees are more likely to remember the person they're interacting with. They interview them on like the 20th, like it's like a day after they interview all three of the people who were working there that when the bomb truck was rented. And these people are they're named Eldon Elliott. The place is named after him. Vicky Beamer and Tom Kessinger. And they talk to all three of them and get a description. And all three say that on April 17th, this one guy comes in who looks like McVeigh in the description and in the sketch. And they said he was with the second guy. And the second guy they described and it matches the description you see from some of the other witnesses who saw a similar looking person with McVeigh. Now, at this point, the FBI has not narrowed the scope of the investigation yet. They did do that later and turned it into a lone wolf thing, but at the beginning they were very much saying this was two people, and that's when they put the sketches out. And that's really what got my attention because I noted, this McVeigh was identified the week that sketch went out, but then John Doe 2 was never identified. And then the FBI turns around and says he doesn't exist less than a year later. Blew me away.
Yeah, so there's a few little things about that.
Yeah.
One, maybe it's jumping the gun, but do you believe that Timothy McVeigh was one of those 2 people? Or
I
are you
believe
100% sure, or are you pretty sure?
I am 100% sure that when you talk about John Doe 1 in terms of the Ryder truck in Oklahoma City, the people who saw him in Oklahoma City, I that was McVeigh.
Okay,
Now
there
when it
might have been 2 trucks though.
Yes,
Okay,
absolutely. According to the
okay.
witnesses in the FBI's investigation, yeah. They
So
they
you
Go ahead.
wouldn't say with 100% certainty that he was one of the guys in the truck that was detonated. You would not say that even if,
Uh,
like, you
I
think
would.
so or oh, you would? Okay, okay, okay.
Yeah, the truck, the
Okay,
bomb that was delivered, he was
right.
100% in
Got it,
that truck.
got it.
Now, when the truck was picked up, there's some dispute. Some people are not quite sure whether or not McVeigh is John Doe 1 because this John Doe 1 figure, according to Tom Kessinger, he had dip in his mouth and he put his dip in
Yeah.
a pocket on the left and a pocket on the right, which is very weird. And so he remembered that. And now McVeigh didn't use nicotine, so
Yeah,
what
he
is
had
he
those rotten
doing?
teeth, but I know this would be way too down. I'm not gonna go, but you said there was some very clever guy who might have intentionally made the thing confusing by getting a second truck that looked just like it. I mean, we don't have
Right?
to get into that, but as far as the John Doe 2, this is a really central point about the whole Oklahoma City bombing story that I think is probably the most fascinating thing. So Tre so they were looking for John Doe too, and I think a lot of people have heard of Trent Adu. His brother was arrested for that and beaten to death in jail, uh, and ended up definitely was not John Doe 2, maybe looked like him or there was some other thing going on. And for me, what's so interesting about it is it seems like even at the scene with the ATF, with the FBI, with the local cops, with all of this, these are different organizations that are not coordinated. Like
Right.
one of them is, in my opinion, one of them is doing it. And the other ones are probably being told to stand down here and there, but like they kind of are letting it unfold. It's not a highly controlled situation. And I think that that's not only interesting for this and how these kind of things are done, but maybe how like the whole system works.
Right.
So is that do you agree that there were a bunch of different organizations, not all of whom were in on it?
Oh, absolutely
Yeah.
right.
Okay.
I don't know necessarily that there are organizations at an organizational level that would be in on it. What I can say with certainty is that McVeigh delivered this bomb with the help of Terry Nichols and a man named John Doe 2 and a man named Robert Jacks, and that we do not know the real names of John Doe 2 and Robert Jacks. And to say that that is unacceptable would be that would be massively
Right.
understating it.
That's a cold case. That's just, they consider that case closed.
Right. Oh, it's closed, and I'm
Yeah.
like, well, there are 186 people and some of these were children,
Yeah.
come on.
Yeah. No, it's unbelievable what and with 9/11 and even COVID, like the ability for uh, more than one person to conspire for that kind of massacre of innocent people. It shocks the conscience. And Bill Barr put a little one paragraph thing out because he was attorney general on the 25th anniversary of Oklahoma City, and it goes on and on about how morally depraved the people who did this was, and how thank goodness you had all these like whatever first responders or whatever whoever he was praising. And I mean, the only entity, group, person I ever even heard of who's capable of this kind of, um, atrocity are these the seems to me the powers that be right now. But I don't want to put words in your mouth like you're just just the facts ma'am researcher, but obviously you know what's up.
Well, yeah, I try to be, but at the same time too, I will speculate certainly, and just make it clear that when doing so. For
Yes.
example, my speculation on this, what it looks like to me when I look at the documents, when I look at the evidence, everything taken in total, it looks to me like there may have been an active sting operation.
Yes.
That was targeting and included Tim McVeigh, and this McVeigh believes he's carrying out a terrorist act from his perspective. But meanwhile, one of the people he's working with is someone who is, I believe, was Andy Strassmeir, and I believe that he was perhaps a law enforcement or intelligence figure who is involved in this. And what it looks like is this sting operation either went sideways or was penetrated by intelligence related figures who had an ulterior motive to making something like this happen. So you would see things like the Patriot Act and the kicking off the war on terror and all that.
So the sting operation would be FBI, you said?
Yep. Joint FBI
Yeah.
ATF sting operation. Only thing that explains the fact that Bomb
Yes.
Squad was there that morning.
Yes.
And yeah,
Yes. So that's one thing that I was wondering about, that they were there. Um, I don't know why the ATF was told to stay home. Maybe it was what I've heard you say, which is they were actually up all night because they were there looking for that thing. But then you have the people who saw um, some, bomb professionals, for lack of a better word, in the parking lot. Two different people saw, I don't know how long before the event, but with sticky stuff, which would
about a
have been
week
C4.
prior. Yeah.
Yeah.
Jane
And
Graham and
that's how
Bruce
long it would take.
Schwab.
Yeah.
Yep. They saw guys with putty that when described to anyone familiar with like composition C4 and explosive charges, and it leads me to believe that that's strange in and of itself because a professional, they're going to break in and do it at night. They're not going to be do it where they can be observed by civilians, so that was strange, very weird. But certainly it could easily be have been accomplices, that we don't know about. As this thing, the FBI pegged as involving at least 4 to 6 people on the first week of the bombing. That was published in the LA Times, and I believe that was largely an accurate assessment. That it was like more like 6 to 8, I think, if we're going to include Roger Moore and Terry Nichols, which I do.
But you're thinking the guys with the C4 were part of were not government agents?
I would put an operator like that as probably working at the behest of in my speculatory framework.
Right.
They would be working at the behest of the intelligence actors who've penetrated this sting operation, right?
Yes.
So
Okay, yeah.
FBI
Yes.
and ATF thinks this is going to
Got
go
it.
off without a hitch. They're going
Right.
to arrest their guy. Meanwhile, the intelligence guys who got in through Strassmeyer are making sure this thing goes sideways in a big way.
Okay, and I guess I would say, because I wondered why they even bothered saving the ATF guys. What do they care? But, they obviously don't care about anyone if they're killing children, but
Right.
the
And there
ATF
could be
guy. Yeah.
leak, you never know
Yeah,
what
unless you got
prompted
them
that.
all. If you got some of them, the other ones would talk. So if you save them all, then they're not gonna say anything. I mean, just that's really beyond
Yeah.
speculation. But, um, okay, because it's very confusing because, it's
Oh,
hard
it
to
is. It
follow all the
it's hard to do
pieces.
an elevator pitch on this, and I didn't even come to this conclusion until after looking at this for more than I'd say 6 or 7 years. But when I was looking at it and I'm hearing Danny Coulson saying things. He's really mad every time he goes on to talk about the bombing. He always says, "Who is Andy Strassmeyer really working for?" And I think his ass is burned up over that. And I think he is identifying Strassmeyer as the weak link in whatever sting they had going. And the reason Colson, this guy is the founder of FBI's hostage rescue team and was special agent in charge in Dallas, I believe it was, at the time of the bombing. And he's assigned to this case. But I've noted every time he goes on an interview, anytime recently, he always makes sure to say, who is Strassmeyer working for? And I think that's important, that he's done that. That behavior
Can
is telling to us.
can you tell me a little bit more about Strassmeyer? I hate to get you know, out of the narrative, but I mean, there are crazy stories about him, like in Berlin and in Elohim City and all of that. I mean, he's such a weird character in all of this.
He
Where is he
is
now?
very strange when you look at who he is and where he ended up. He is now in Germany, and I know that basically he came over here not long after the Fort Smith sedition trial failed. This is where the government tried to prosecute all these white supremacists for sedition, and they lost. And then it was just months later that he comes over to the United States, and here's this German guy from a prominent family in Berlin whose father was like the equivalent of our Secretary of State for German Chancellor Helmut Kohl in the 90s. So he's this pretty big political figure. And then his one of his brothers is like on the city council. So he's from a rather prominent family. He comes to the United States, only he's not like your regular tourist. Instead, what happens is he ends up at a white supremacist compound in Texas, the Texas Light Infantry. And he starts associating with these guys, and he's at their compound. And evidently, the guys in that group ended up chasing him off because they felt like he was some type of informant. And then he goes from there to Elohim City, where eventually the same thing happens. He
Mhm,
positions himself to become their head of security, where then he incites and advocates for
mhm,
violence. He's
mhm.
observed um, by people who are informants for the ATF, such as Carol Howe. He's observed inciting people and talking about blowing up buildings. He cases the Murrah building at one point with this Carol Howe, this informant. And so,
That's why the joke is Elohim City. It was like
yeah,
Elohim like you go to a gun convention, it's a bunch of fads who are like this, it was like Elohim
right.
City.
You're absolutely right. It is comical. You have this person who's like an undercover and who may have been being exploited unwittingly by intelligence related figures, who is talking to a person who is an informant as well. Uh, the, that's what
Yeah,
Jesse Trinitou says. You know, he said five people
yeah.
can't sit down at Elohim City without three of them being informants.
Yes, and really, I actually when I hear people say informant, that annoys me because I really, I just look at that now and think what they're saying is it's an agent provocateur. It's an
Hmm.
agent. It's
Hmm.
not an informant. It's an agent. It's not when you hear informant, you think this guy got arrested. He was already involved, but it's not. They get them to infiltrate their it's
Agent
informant is
provocateur,
yeah,
that describes Strassmeir for sure.
yeah.
Bombings, mass shootings, things like that is what he's pushing.
And what could be more pathocratic, like the pathocracy? Like, what could be more of a violation of any authority that government could have that they actually hurt people, to prove some point, they convince themselves that like I always think that people who did 9/11, they just in their minds, they drafted the people in that building
Right,
because they had to get America on board, a tripwire or whatever, to solve the real problem. You you
right,
know? I mean, it's really twisted. Like I heard you and Scott talking about how it's just mental. You have to have mental problems to think like this. And for them to just be setting up people to die is I mean, it's still hard to get my mind around. And I'm a little bit inured to it because of all the false flags that we've seen in our lifetime. But
mhm,
that's just crazy that they go in there to that. Okay, so that's the idea. The main story is that I mean they won't even say it's a two-man job. They're saying it's a lone nut. But you
yeah,
can see, I remember seeing a high-ranking military guy retired. I'm sure you've seen it. I think it was in the Noble Eye uh, where he just says, "Look, this cannot have been a truck bomb.
right,
Look at the
okay, yep.
columns that came down." And then I heard you say that you actually saw a video, of the thing. Did you say you saw a video? Somebody took a picture and you saw it. It was very clear to you that it wasn't a truck bomb.
Well, I have the Melvin Sumter VHS tape, which is a tape recorded by, a, sheriff, and it's right there at the blast scene right after it happened. And my comments weren't so much to say it wasn't a truck bomb, it was more to say when I saw that tape, the scope and scale of the damage had previously been not quite fully comprehended by me. He's standing right up close and like It's
Oh, you could
massive.
see people.
Yeah, if you look, yeah, you probably could. I mean, he was right. Like if you're standing 20
Right.
feet away from a building, rather
Yeah.
than everything we see is,
Yeah.
helicopters or whatever. It was
Right.
just massive
Yeah.
damage. And I have said before that I am open to the idea that there were some kind of explosives used here in conjunction with the truck bomb. And
Got
certainly
it.
the seismic evidence is people point to that, and that's you have two different seismographs running in Oklahoma City at that time. And they both record two events occurring about a second apart. And
Wow.
some people have said they believe this is the truck bomb going off at this almost the exact same time as explosive charges.
And there were recovered explosive charges that hadn't gone off, right?
There were reports of that, and we have the footage of that. It was on CNN, and it's in the
Yeah,
news
I
footage.
remember. Yeah,
There were
that. Yeah.
three times when the rescue efforts were stopped because they said explosive. In fact, we even have Frank Keating, the governor of Oklahoma at the time, saying that they found an explosive device. You know,
I
Eh,
was trying before this show to find a book I bought that was written by Governor Keating's brother the year before called The Last Jihad.
that's right. Yes,
And it was the whole entire story, almost word for word, except for that they pinned it on, I believe, Islamic terrorists rather than domestic terrorists, which just goes to show you it's like plug and play. Sometimes they don't even decide till after the fact, I bet. But but yeah, what could possibly explain that? I mean, that's just nuts.
it's very weird. It's Martin Keating, which is Frank Keating's brother. He writes this book about an act of terrorism, an attack on a building, just like Oklahoma City. And one of his characters is named Thomas McVeigh.
Wow!
What
Yeah, I
his
wish I had the
name?
book in front of me because I wanna get the copyright. It was 1 year before, I think. I think it was published in 1994.
Yeah, well, it was published around either 94 or 95, but he said that he wrote it like in 93, 94. And then that remains another one of the unusual. There are a lot of little weird things with this case that cause you to think, well, what's that about? That's one of them,
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that is and the fact that the name of McVeigh, which,
right?
just that's, uh because I've read quite a bit on this. I started with Jim Keith's OKC Bomb, which
Okay, bomb, classic. That's a
Okay,
deep cut
Bomb.
right there.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
love Jim Keith. He's my favorite, and I'm currently reading onto my show just like an hour every week. This, which is a great book, and I'm thinking of doing this, but it seems dated. Like it seems like you have learned so much since then.
We definitely have, but he was a pioneer back then.
Yeah,
Again, in like 97, I had The Politics of Terror by David Hoffman.
yeah.
That's still a good book. And there was Jim Keith's OK Bomb. That was good. He got it out there, quickly, and it had a lot of details in it that people probably didn't know about. But nowadays, I think the three best books on this are going to be Aberration in the Heartland of the Real by Wendy Pating. There you
Yep, I
go.
got it right here. Real
Fantastic.
full of a
Excellent.
jillion notes. I hope it's never valuable because I wrote in it.
And then we
Okay,
also
yeah.
have Oklahoma City by Roger Charles and
Oh,
Andrew Gumbel.
your guru.
Yes, yes, he was like
Yes,
my mentor. And
yes.
I met him. I was introduced to him by Wendy in 2016, and he then started sharing with me a great deal of documents, and that's what spawned my archive project with the
He was a
institute.
local reporter at the time, is that right?
He was a reporter and he worked at basically out of DC. He had done a Newsweek story on the Iranian air shoot down. Um, and he was assigned to Oklahoma City bombing when he worked for ABC News, or that is to say CBS News 60 Minutes. He was an associate producer there and was assigned this subject in 97.
There was a time when that's a lot of that stuff was legit. They had real reporting, and I feel like with every like there's that book Crisis and Leviathan.
Hmm.
I feel like there's a crisis and censorship where every major event has been followed by a further tightening up of, and of course, that was the point of this, but even of just media. So this also, I think this goes hand in hand with the 93 World Trade Center bombing. I think they were
Mhm.
both kind of meant to start that Patriot Act, get the Patriot Act started. But there was a guy in there, Ahmad Salem. I don't
Yeah,
know if you've ever heard of him. Yes, so he was a quote informant who was like helping them build a bomb for the World Trade Center, which was in the basement. I mean, it was going to go off. It was going to kill people for sure, and it would have been. I mean, I don't know what it would have been, but very terrible, and people died as it was.
that's
But
right. And
yeah, God.
it wasn't it that he the FBI ends up letting him go because he asks them if he can replace the explosive components with inert components, and they say no. They want to gather more intelligence, and he wants to be paid more, and they balk at it, so they don't handle him with any finesse. He leaves, and then they get Ramzi Youssef, and the plot happens.
So and he went back and said, "What did you?" He recorded a call with his handler
Yeah,
saying, "I want my money." And what the heck? You said you were not going to use a real bomb, and then all of a sudden people are dead, and the guy goes, well, you know how things go, and I can't pay you. It's not my money. It's like what? I mean, it was really crazy. Like it was banal. It was so mundane that it was crazy to think what they were actually talking about, but CBS News played it.
right, right.
They
And it's
played it,
amazing that he recorded that, that he thought to do that.
and
And
the
you're right.
news played it, though, it's
And
even
they
more
played it.
amazing, you
Yeah.
know?
Roger did talk to me a little about that, about how, he was pushing to get these stories out there with Oklahoma City. And he did this piece with 60 Minutes called The Families Want to Know, which was specifically about the ATF not being there that morning and the bomb squad being observed outside of the courthouse. And it was played and had very good ratings, a very favorable coverage. And they were going to do another piece, and the network ended up spiking it, and he believes that there was pressure from the Department of Justice that caused that.
Okay, yeah, and I mean, now, no one would even consider, making any kind of real reporting on anything like this at all. I mean,
No.
ridiculous. Uh, I'm tempted to ask you what you thought of the Trump assassination attempt, but I don't wanna
Oh
get into
god.
it.
That thing, it's so bizarre. And what amazes me is how quickly the media has just moved on, and you're like, what? The presidential candidate in a
Yes,
major party was almost just
right.
assassinated, and you've just forgotten it, you
Just
know?
just keep moving. I mean, that is a proof in itself, in my opinion.
That's right. That proves
That's a
what you just
yeah,
said. That's right. They're
yeah,
not gonna air
yeah.
this stuff.
So, okay, okay, the John Doe 2, Robert, yep. So there was a second person in the truck. Now let's think about this. Okay, I after I saw that retired bomb guy say that there was no way it was the truck, and I started thinking about how, like, this happens with everything, like electronic devices, everything. The It's like exponential or the reverse of exponential, whatever, how things dissipate with
Right.
distance.
That's right.
So to get that deep into the building, it's kind of like the 9/11 thing, like, it can't go down at
What
free
you
full
found
speed all the way to the
you
bottom.
Right. And with Oklahoma City, what you find is there are columns that are further away from the bomb, which, if you think of it as like a concentric circle, right, that's going out. And here are these columns that are further away from the bomb truck, which are completely demolished, vaporized. And then here's a column which is right next to it, which is still standing. That's asymmetrical. That doesn't make sense. And people who have looked at this, who are experts, have talked about seeing cutting charges or talking, and then you have all the videos where they talk
Ah,
about we've found explosives, and it makes you wonder, what did they find there? And we still don't exactly know what that was. And
right.
there are so many questions, and I've always stuck to mainly John Doe 2. And then the reason I focused in on
Yeah.
him so much early on is because we had so many witnesses. When you go through the FBI 302 reports, and Roger provided me with a great deal of these 302 reports, which he served as an investigator for the McVeigh defense team. They hired him after this special, and so he had access to a great deal of this material. And I'm reviewing it, and I'm just like, all along the way, McVeigh is with this other guy. And how come we don't know who he is? And why in June of 1995 did the FBI come out and say he did not exist? I knew at
Okay.
that moment I was being lied to, right?
So who I know you said, but who do you think it was, maybe?
I don't know. It could be one of these guys in the ARA, but the physical description doesn't quite line up with the guys in the ARA. You know, it's hard
I
to
mean, I'm
say.
assuming it was a quote informant guy, like
You
I'm
think
assuming
it's a
it's a hand
provoc
holder.
Right. You think it's like a provocateur. Like one of the main grand jurors on this, Hoppy Heidelberg, said he believed that John Doe 2 was an informant or government
Yeah,
agent. And he said the only reason for saying that is because, if it's a criminal, they're not going to
yeah,
protect him.
no.
Yeah.
And a couple of these things, or a couple of these points reminded me, I just watched a Netflix documentary, which they're just rolling them out one after another to like just they're all limited hangouts, in my opinion. But
Yeah.
so this one, it was great. They're great. Like the first 80% of them, they're great, except for the Unabomber one. I was like, that lost me in like 1 minute. I was like, that's wrong. But this was Son of Sam, and it's called Sons
Oh,
of
okay.
Sam. Yeah, it's
Right,
really,
right.
really good. And then when I was so fascinated by it, and the last episode is, but all of this is not true because the journalist was crazy who figured it all out. So of course I bought that guy's book. I watched every jailhouse interview with Son of Sam, and he's this amazingly powerful evangelical born again preacher now. And I mean, brought tears to my eyes for various reasons. But one thing that he and Timothy McVeigh had absolutely in common, as my father would say, they wouldn't say shit if they had a mouthful. Like
Mhm.
neither of them gave up their accomplices.
Yeah.
And yeah, I
Mhm.
mean, I think Son of Sam was trying to save his own life. Timothy McVeigh, I think he might have thought he was going to get rescued, and I wonder if there's any chance he did. I mean, he's dead, right?
I believe that he was executed.
Yeah,
I believe that that's the easiest way to handle this situation.
that's a
You
gimme.
Yeah, yeah, you just let the execution play out at no loose ends, right? So, but he did believe that evidently, which is interesting, makes you wonder. And he did tell his sister, that he was pulled out during special forces training
New
and
York Times
told.
published that.
They did publish excerpt from letter to his sister, published, yeah, that he was selected to be part of this group that would be carrying out special operations. And so he supposedly believed that he was going to be extracted or something. But on the other hand, I know what his ideological views are based upon people who knew him and the material in the case. And you look at it and you know that basically he wants to be the martyr, and he considers himself a silent brother, like the silent brotherhood, about the order. He considers himself one of them. There you go. And that talks about a terror group that was, I think, very similar to who did the bombing. It was a group of guys just like them.
This is a
Who-
book called The Silent Brotherhood by Kevin Flynn and Gary Gerhardt, Inside America's Racist Underground. So when I read this Aberration in the Heartland of the Real about Timothy McVeigh by Wendy Painting, you I it's almost equivocal in that book what his ideology is. I almost feel like she takes you through this, um, he had a bad childhood, then he was in the service, and they gave him all sorts of vaccines, and I want your opinion on that. Now that I think about it, every soldier I ever met, it's like, yeah, they give you a ton of vaccines. And I'm thinking, where are you going? Like, what? How many diseases are there in the place you are going? And of course, now I'm like, they're not vaccines,
Mhm.
or whatever. So he did that. It impaired his health. He had that weird subgroup called the cohort of like weird aged people. I want to talk a little bit about that.
Mhm.
And then he had influences. I mean, they were obviously they were setting him up for stuff. If you pull him out, if he said he was pulled out for special operations, which was his dream, I feel like I wonder if he was a patsy from day one, and they just played on that. And uh, so So you feel like I wondered if he was gay, like, if you feel like you have a he had a coherent ideology and you feel like you can
I
describe
think
that?
yes, I think he had a distinct persona. Now, whether or not that persona was the true Tim McVeigh or the way he felt all the time remains to be seen,
Okay.
right? And you talk about things like MK Ultra, one of the things that they wanted to do was create a subject where you have personality A and personality B.
Yeah.
Personality A is this patriot, loyal American. Personality B is this subversive. Now, personality A, the loyal American,
Yep.
knows everything about personality B and personality A, but then personality B, the subversive, only knows about itself. And their goal was to create a subversive agent who could penetrate these networks, but would not fold under questioning because they truly believed all of this stuff. Well, with McVeigh, it's very much like that. It seems he had a persona that truly believed these things. Now, whether or not, though, he was one of these, that what they refer to in Wendy's book is like the experimental wolf is one of the theories presented, and this kind of addresses that subject. But let's assume for a minute that it's legitimate, and that's how he always is. So what you have is a guy who very much likes the founding fathers. He agrees with very, I would say, far right libertarian type viewpoint. um, on the other hand, he also has mixed in with that a great deal of race-based hatred and a what I would call a white supremacist ideology, very much like this group, the Order, where these people have conflated several different things and they have um, eh, basically sort of perverted the beliefs of the founding fathers and twisted it into this hate filled ideology. And he believed he was getting back for Waco for what he had done.
Oh, right, okay. I just had formulated a perfect question. I'm like, "Wait, Waco." No, the thing about the order and that stuff, it's very hard for me to get my mind around organically emerging violent white supremacy, especially in this era,
Hmm.
because I don't know if I'm younger than McVeigh. I mean, but basically, I would say we're contemporaries.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, he really was young at the time that this happened, right?
He
So,
was, yeah.
yeah, so we're probably contemporaries, and I grew up in New York. My father's in the Navy, my brother's in the Air Force. I mean, not, like, permanently, just during war. My father's in World War II, and my brother's in Vietnam, and, uh, I just don't it's hard for me to believe that where did this come from, and is it real? Or was a seed planted in was it a sparkle in J. Edgar Hoover's eye at some point? Like, what do you think this comes from? And now, of course, they're making hay with it. They're
Right.
expanding it to the half of the country. So
They are, yeah.
what's what do you think is, I mean, and it's more of a general question I'm interested in your opinion about how much of any of this stuff is any of the trends that we see, the political levers are organic, and how many, how much of it do you think is created?
Right. That's a very good question. And I think you have a mixture. And I think what you'll find is once you've read The Silent Brotherhood, you're like, oh, I understand it. I
Oh,
get it.
really?
Yeah, I get it now. That's what it took for me. When I read that, I'm like, These are the guys that McVeigh was trying to be." The Order were all captured and put in jail. Then it comes along a new generation, and they are picking up where the Order left off. And that's, I believe, the Aryan Republican Army and Tim McVeigh. I believe that they consider themselves part of that movement. Now, you do have a real actual grassroots type terrorism like that. And of course, you also have this astroturfed fake stuff that is fomented by feds and provocateurs. And I think there's room in this story for there to have been a little bit of an overlap, perhaps. Maybe some of these people, some of these actors perhaps were bad actors, perhaps were agent provocateurs. But I do believe that, in at least with the case of with McVeigh, I believe it was genuine. That was his belief, and I believe some of the people who were with him on the morning of the bombing, which I contend were members of the Aryan Republican Army, I believe they also deeply held these beliefs. Now, out of that group, though, I think there was absolutely a provocateur in there, and that's the guy, has to be the guy the FBI is protecting when they say John Doe 2 doesn't
Yeah,
exist.
that's what I think. So, I was fine buying the Silent Brotherhood, but I had my fingers poised over the keyboard, and I was like, "I don't think I should buy the Turner Diaries."
That's probably what you, yeah, get the PDF online. That
I
though is
don't even want that.
what what's great that you mentioned that, because these guys, the Order, which the Silent Brotherhood is about, they formed themselves after the group called the Organization in the Turner Diaries.
Right, so who wrote the Turner Diaries? A Fed or a person?
A person wrote it, not a
Okay.
Fed. Yep.
You really believe that a person wrote that?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
No, he went by the pseudonym Andrew McDonald. His name though is William Luther Pierce, and he was involved in like the American Nazi Party early on. He split from them and then created
Well,
something.
I have questions about the Nazis too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, who knows where they
Well,
came from?
well, there's
But
no doubt that this manual has probably been used by these informants and provocateurs to further, create. Well, if the threat's not there, it doesn't present itself as enough of a threat, some cases they create one.
yes, yes. Okay. Now we're in. I assume we're in agreement, obviously, because you think this they're agents provocateur. They, I mean, they definitely exploit this stuff. They conflated it with the militia thing, which really pisses me off because I actually think there are very few things um, positively mandated to as a responsibility of the people in the Constitution. Very few,
And the
maybe
militia,
even
it's
just
very
one.
clear.
It may be
Yeah,
the only thing that you are required to have. It's not just that you need to have guns, but you have to have a militia, and we don't. And that would be the difference maker. So they're going to squish those things together. And he wasn't Tim McVeigh. You said wasn't even a militia guy.
not a militia guy, a white supremacist guy, and they flipped it from that to militias and neutralized the militia movement overnight.
It's like Saddam Hussein, like, okay, even if you think somebody over there did 9/11, it was Saudi Arabia. You know what I
Right.
mean? They were all Saudi Arabian. So, but we gotta go to Iraq. Like, it's just like, yeah, people won't notice, and they don't.
They don't.
They
They don't
don't.
notice.
It's
When
nuts.
if I tell
Yeah.
a person, did you know that 24 people saw Tim McVeigh in Oklahoma City, and that, every one of them saw him with another person? And most people, oh, isn't that Terry Nichols? Or no, he
Yeah.
wasn't there. He was in Kansas. That we still don't know this guy's name, and that it's going to bother me forever.
Yeah. And Terry Nichols, I actually, I mean, do you feel like I've heard people say Terry Nichols is innocent.
Really?
Do
Yeah.
you think he belongs in jail?
He's not innocent. He
Right.
absolutely was smart enough to know what he was doing. He
Okay.
was a person who was easily influenced, easily taken advantage of, which I believe McVeigh did do. He used Terry Nichols,
Okay.
for example, when he was acquiring the nitromethane and various components for the bomb. He had Terry Nichols hold them and keep them in his storage lockers. He used his credit cards,
Did he
but
sleep with his wife?
he did. He banged the guy's
That
wife.
was
I
the
mean,
one, yeah.
uh, just a rotten person to do that sort of
Yeah.
thing. But he was using Nichols, and Nichols, for his part, has in large part kind of come clean about his involvement in the bombing. He
Okay.
did for a while say that he was innocent and so forth, but he's,
Okay.
as part of his Christian faith, has admitted, yes, I did do these things. This is what happened, and so that's
Is
good.
he out or is he still in jail? Or is he dead?
He he's still in prison. He's in Supermax, and in fact,
Wow.
he is in communications management there. So he was talking to one of the bombing victims, Kathy Wilburn, and she was allowed to call him. And basically, what happened there is she was arranging to have 60 minutes interview him live on the air, where he would say that Roger Moore was involved in the bombing. There were others involved, and at the last minute, they pulled her name from the calling list and refused to allow the phone call, and
So,
she hasn't heard
Roger
from him since.
Moore was the spook.
Yeah, Roger Moore,
Yes, that's right. I
he
was
was
trying to
this.
remember the name of the guy
Yeah,
who was like, "That guy is
he
definitely" the
he's who many of us think was like McVeigh's contact or like his
Yeah, yeah,
handler.
conduit. Yeah. So, and Terry Nichols was part of that cohort thing. I mean, was that an MK Ultra project, basically? No.
That I don't know. That was very interesting part of Wendy Painting's book. I was not previously aware of it. And this
Oh,
is
interest
basically
oh.
like the DoD is looking at new methods of supposedly making people more combat effective and having better interpersonal relations and cohesiveness in units. And so they did this new thing where you're with the same people from like boot
Mhm.
camp all the way through. It was like a new, it was never like that before. You do boot camp, you go off, and you probably never see those
And
folks
it
again.
was, like, not the same type of person, so it was different ages and everything. I think that's part of the experiment, and I remember in
Yeah,
college, I was going out with a guy who was at a public college, and he was in a dorm, and unbeknownst to them, they did not have a they didn't get to sign off on it, but they were in an experiment where they put the worst, dumbest pothead kids, which was my boyfriend, and the super smart, like, going to medical school kids, and they put them in the
together, huh?
same yes, and the kids, everybody was a complete bum pothead by the end. And then they recovered, like, all the kids who turned into potheads my boyfriend dropped out, but all the kids who turned into potheads, uh, like, moved out, and one of them, I heard from one of them, he did go to medical school and everything, so they completely bounced back, but it's just I'm just verifying that they do experiments like that.
They
I've
do.
I've witnessed it, yeah.
Sociological experiment. You're right to think that is when you read that in Wendy's book. It's very right to think that.
Oh, I have to ask you an off-topic, but current event question, and, thank you so much. Okay, I'm just so thirsty. It's really hot here. Um, so here's the question. I I was looking into this JD Vance thing because his stuff is weird. I don't know if you spent any time looking into
I
that.
I
Yeah.
read a little that Whitney Webb wrote. And it was not good.
Okay, so yeah, he does the I didn't read that, but I know he like the Peter Thiel connection and
Yeah,
René Girard, which is like a specific philosophy, and Thiel likes Girard. He also likes Leo Strauss, and you know what that's all about. So he's got all of this, but he went from Ohio State to Yale Law School, which is tough to do, and he got a huge book, he got a huge movie, he made a lot of money that way. Peter Thiel got him his first job. He got him his second job. He got him a VC. Like they made him rich, whatever. And my thinking was he joined the Marines. And before all this happened, before he even went to college, I think. And my thinking was, and I had one of my listeners they're awesome. People are watching now. And like, if you ask them something, they'll give you the answer right away. So
absolutely. Yeah.
it's fantastic. So what I was wondering when I was looking at this, like, do they like do psych tests on these people? And not only do they do psych tests on all of them immediately, IQ test, psych test, everything, the guy who invented it, do you know about this? Who wrote the book, The Assessment of Men?
No, no, I don't think so.
He was the guy who MK Ultra Ted Kaczynski at Harvard.
Oh, Murray, right?
Yeah, Murray,
Okay.
Henry Murray. Yeah. So he wrote
Wow.
Assessment of Men. He got a like a Medal of Honor for writing that.
I didn't
And
know that, but
yeah, and
that's not surprising. It dovetails with everything
yes,
we've been saying,
I
right?
mean the whole thing. So when I saw JD Vance, I was like, oh, they made him in like communications or whatever in the Marines. I was like, oh,
He could have
they
possibly
put him
been
in the
identified.
CIA, or whatever. I mean,
Sure. Oh,
that's
no,
what I
no.
think he is. Yeah.
Well, there's no doubt there are people who are probably assessed and viewed as, viable. This is person a candidate,
But it's the
for
psych.
to
It's
be an
the
asset. It's well,
yeah.
sure, you got to find out. They're probably looking. They probably have a personality profile. I'm sure that says this is what we need, out of a
Yeah.
person for whatever it is they want that person to do. Whether it be a successful politician, whether it be like some special operations killer. There are certain personalities that they want for those
See,
things.
I feel like it's one of those little puzzles where you draw lines. So they feed like your thing in one side and they have like their list of like what psyops we're going to do in the next 10 years on the other. And I think they don't have to do them all at once. They're like, oh, we've got a guy who can do this. Let's get him. We don't have a guy who can do this right now, but we'll do it next time. So I was really, once I saw it, I thought of McVeigh. And when I thought they pulled him out, what he wrote to his sister, I didn't believe that. I thought they pulled him out and told him it was special forces because that's what he wanted, but
That's
he was
right, that's right.
being set up
And
as,
that's how
it made
that's
me
called
sympathetic to him.
that's handling. That's what it is. That's if you're handled
Yeah.
by an intelligence agency,
Oh, and that's
they
Roger Moore.
they basically it means you could be doing something and totally unwitting to you don't even know the people you're working for. Your whole
Mhm.
grasp of what you're doing is warped, and I think that may have been done with Andy Strassmeir and in a way McVeigh. With
To him?
Strass
To
like
Andy Strassmeir?
yes, because see, I think Strassmeir believed that he was an undercover law enforcement asset,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
He when he came over here, he applied to be with the DEA. He wanted an undercover law enforcement role. Now, what if he thinks for a minute? Let's for a minute consider he thinks he's working for law enforcement. And what happens when they tell him you need to push a lot harder on this bombing thing, man? You need to get the thing going. What's he going to do? He's going to do that.
Right.
Meanwhile, you have these intelligence guys who are like, we're going to pull this damn thing off. And we're going to do it because we got a true believer with McVeigh. We have this guy, this asset with Strassmeir who will do anything because he thinks, we're his law enforcement bosses.
Yeah.
So
And he
I
did
think
get away with it. He's gone.
he fled and he was protected, and that's I think the biggest thing that clued me in as far as his involvement, not so much to say anything bad about JD Cash's work or anything else, but when I noticed though that Danny Coulson kept pointedly saying, "Who does he work for?" To me, that tells me this cop is really pissed at this guy, right? He hates this guy. Every time he does an interview, he questions his allegiances, and I'm thinking, why is he doing that? Is
Yeah.
it because did this like was he part of their sting and like he's no longer taking orders from the FBI and at some point was taking orders from his handlers, but Strassmeir doesn't know that that's what happened. Like Strassmeir thinks the whole duration he's getting orders from like law enforcement.
Right.
Meanwhile, what he doesn't know is he's been handled into this position and now the things they're asking him to do are pushing way too hard, pushing, the wrong buttons. He thinks it's part of the sting. And you when you read the book by Ambrose Evans Pritchard called The Secret Life of Bill Clinton. There's a whole several chapters on Oklahoma City, and Strassmeir is interviewed in that, and he basically concedes that, you know, without saying it, that there was an informant in the operation, and of course he's the informant, and of course he can't say anything because what would happen?
Yeah. Definitely
Yeah,
not. Oh, interesting. Because I thought Strassmeyer was like the most I never understood. I thought he was like super evil, but I
yeah.
never understood what his
I think he
I
was
never really
used.
understood his role.
He was young as well. He didn't have a lot of experience. He did have
Okay.
training in intelligence, but
Okay.
I believe as a provocateur, telling these people you need to, marshaling them to move along with the bombing plot, that they need to, let's go target this building, let's go case the building, come on, let's go. And he goes and he cases it with them.
Yeah.
He's following orders and he thinks, I'm setting up a sting operation. They're
Yeah.
going to go out there at 3 in the morning and they'll be arrested. What he doesn't know is no, they've changed the time, they changed the location, the law enforcement's not going to be there. Oh, there's charges in the building as well. This bombing happens, and then what is he to think? Oh,
Oh, yeah. Get out of
hell,
town. Make like
get
a
out of here.
Saudi
Yeah. And
on
that's what he did.
9/12.
And he's kept his mouth shut. One day he might
Yeah.
talk about it, I think. One
Well,
day.
that would not be advisable, I would imagine. I don't know if they have a trail of bodies of this, but the Son of Sam thing, as I kept getting into it, I mean, dozens of people were killed after Son of Sam got arrested.
I read about like I think it was the
The
Carr
Carr
brothers
brothers, yeah,
both
both of
dying.
them.
The one
Yep.
who was up in Minot was really suspicious.
Yeah,
And
his
then
head. I accidentally stumbled upon a picture of him. The first picture I saw, he was on his stomach. Then I saw a picture, they rolled
like
him over.
headless.
Yes!
My God.
I didn't know. So it was terrible. And the brother was in a really, really gruesome, like pointless car accident, like no apparent cause of it. And actually, Berkowitz did say like that's how they do it. Really vicious car accidents. It was
And
one of the things
that
they do.
is, yeah, we know the car accidents, and in fact, one of the things they used to do, and if you look in the 1950s, especially the 1950 and 1960, there are dozens of people who died from falling from like the ninth or 10th floor. And the James
Forrester,
Forrestal, Frank
Forrestal, yeah.
Olson, yeah, Frank Olson,
Oh,
all these, and there a couple that were these Soviet spies. They figured out this guy
they
is
were
a spy.
defenestrated.
These
That's the
guys
name of
were
that. That's an actual
defenestration that's being
kill
thrown off
somebody
a
by
building.
throwing them out the window. It's called
Yes,
defenestration.
and so before they found more sophisticated methods of killing people, they were just throwing people off
Yeah.
buildings and saying, "Oh, he jumped," you know.
Right, interesting, but, I mean, the body count is definitely real. I don't wanna keep you. Do you have some time? Are you
Oh yeah, yeah.
limited? Okay, I didn't know. I won't take a ton of time, but I was hoping we could talk
Oh,
a
it's
little more,
fine. Yeah.
because it's the top of the hour. Okay, I have a few. Oh, another thing that I and it disturbs me when I have any kind of sympathy for the people who do these horrible things. Like, you're very clear Timothy McVeigh was guilty.
Right.
It's an executable offense, like, that's fine, and all of this, and Son of Sam, I absolutely like, he won't even ask for parole. He's like, I that
He
would be
knows that he did wrong. Yeah. He
yeah, and he's
knows
like, "It would
now
be
at
very
least.
upsetting to the victims." Like, I'd be happy to, like, live a good life, but I don't wanna upset those people. They don't deserve it, and but, but but if the stories are true of what he did, what he was a part of in Iraq,
Right. Driving
that
over
could
bodies, hearing them
yes.
crunch. I mean, that would
How could
give
a
any person.
patriot yeah.
Yeah.
So one thing, and it was new to me, is that they actually had and I had heard this, that the Iraqi soldiers were surrendering en masse.
Yes.
So many that they couldn't take them with them. They were just putting their arms down. They were like, "We're just gonna walk with you. We want water." Like, we don't
That's right.
we're not gonna cause trouble. You don't have to, like, incarcerate us. We're just wanna go with you and give up. And they were just mowing them down and burying them in the sand with bulldozers. And
Right.
he was aware of that. He was part of that, right?
He was a part of that. That's right. That is, I think, if you compare that to Vietnam, you have similar instances where war crimes are happening,
Mhm.
right? And I think that's what that was, is a war crime. And uh, God,
Hmm.
it's stunning. Anybody who was
Yeah.
involved with that is psychologically damaged as a result of it, of having done that, and it makes you wonder um, why someone didn't put a stop to it. You know,
And how those guys, I mean, I don't know if there was a very high suicide rate after Iraq like there was after Vietnam, but
probably.
because the cognitive dissonance of why they signed up. They signed up. Those 9/11, that 9/11 crew, the Iraqis, the soldiers went over there. I've met a few of them. They absolutely, I think I would bet every last one of them signed up because they were so horrified by 9/11. They wanted to fight for their country. They wanted to give
Right.
their lives in defense of their homeland. And then to see, and I'm sure they knew, then they probably started thinking, yeah, why aren't we in Saudi Arabia? Like they were probably thinking the whole thing out. How you could come home and live, it's hard enough for me after COVID to be like, this is our
Just be,
government.
yeah, be normal. I mean,
Yeah,
that kind of thing would weigh heavy on any person's psyche,
yeah.
you know.
I
I'm
can't
sure
imagine. Yeah.
I'm sure it played a part in McVeigh's own PTSD, and probably may have played a part in his rationalizing murdering people,
And the split personality thing. Now,
which
I'm not saying
requires
split personality, but
trauma, and that's
yes.
exactly what that is, right? It would be
Yeah.
traumatic if you're in a vehicle and you hear it crunching the bones of another person. That's traumatic, you know. It's killing someone.
Yeah.
That's
I think they were alive. Yeah.
yeah, they're running over people. It's just
That's
horrifying.
It was very, I mean, yeah, so I don't have sympathy, but I do I guess I'm with you, like, there are people much more guilty parties, much bigger guilt and they are not paying. That's the thing with 9/11 that bothers me is, like, people get mad at you. "Well, how can you say that? Those are the people who did 9/11." I'm like, "What I'm saying
Mhm.
is those are not the people who did 9/11, and we should get the people who did 9/11." Like,
And they
I'm
turn that
yeah,
into, "Oh, you're against America." Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, I had the same arguments when the people
yes.
with the Iraq war. And what I like to say if they try to question me on Oklahoma City is I'll say, "Look, Tim McVeigh did do this. He was arrested, he was tried, he was convicted, and he was executed. John Doe 2, meanwhile, has never even been named, and that to me is an affront. It's an affront to our system of justice, and that's why it makes me angry.
And there were videos, were there not? Like, can you talk a little bit about some of the evidence that you've seen or has disappeared or the things that or like, should not be ignored, especially
Absolutely.
around that?
For sure, there was videotape evidence. We know because there was a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit by a writer named David Hoffman for the Murrah building surveillance videos. In 1999, documents came out from this trial that said that the FBI had taken into possession 23 recordings from the area. Subsequent to that, we obtained documents from the FBI's investigation, which shows that they had assigned to agents the task of going around to the various businesses and collecting the surveillance footage. Now, in addition to that, I have clips myself that I found on old recordings of news from the time of Weldon Kennedy from he's the special agent in charge of the investigation, saying that they've obtained surveillance video and they would like to request if anyone else in the area has footage to please reach out to them. Right. So, but we know from that FOIA case document, they had 23 recordings. Now, in addition to that, we have an FBI document where one of their agents is tasked with reviewing those recordings and noting which ones were positive in terms of evidentiary value or which ones are negative. So she goes through these recordings and she identifies three of them as positive, meaning those three either show the bomber, the bomb truck, or the bomb. Yeah, it shows the event. So we know that there were at least three recordings that captured this. The problem is the FBI today says that there is no videotape of the bombing, that they have nothing, and what the material they have released to Jesse Trinidad, all the cameras are off at 9:02 a.m. They spring back on. The event is not recorded in full. The material is obviously excised or redacted. And we just know from also there are people in law enforcement who saw the footage. And back in the fall of 1995, October 28th, 1995, it ran in the Associated Press and nationally. It ran that a law enforcement source says that on the surveillance footage, you can see McVeigh in the bomb truck and a passenger. And it said that this is a law enforcement source who has said this to Associated Press. So people who were reviewing those tapes at that time spoke to the media about it.
Right.
And it's been put out there. And we have the video clips, we have the articles, but people just forget, you
So,
know?
2 things. They well, one is that of those 3 positives, one of them at least actually show the destruction of the building.
Absolutely, it would. If the one in question is from the Regency Towers, which is positioned at a high level on the Regency Towers apartment complex, directly in the middle of that view of that camera is I think it's the north face of the Murrah building, which is where McVeigh parked the truck. That's where the big piece is missing and all the pictures you see. That camera would have had an unobstructed view, so it would have shown the truck parking, McVeigh getting out of the driver's seat, leaving, and John Doe 2 coming around the front or the back and crossing the street with him. And they were observed doing that when they crossed the street. A catering truck driver slammed on his brakes, guy named Rodney Johnson. He said two guys bolted away from the Ryder truck right in front of me. He identified one of those men as Tim McVeigh. The day McVeigh was captured, he identified him to the FBI, said, yep, that was the guy. And he had another guy behind him.
Wow. I mean, you can't argue with that, but that picture, that video would also make it very clear that the truck did not blow that building up.
Exactly. My contention is what would happen if you view this video and you see the truck explode and the building implodes on itself at the same time?
Yeah.
You know what you're looking at.
Right.
That's not if you see an
Right.
implosion, you know that
You're
that's
gonna
not
see it's you're gonna see it separate. You're gonna see it.
two separate things. That's right.
Yeah.
And just like is depicted on the seismographic
God, jeez,
evidence.
doesn't it make you crazy that they get away with this stuff? It's crazy.
It does. It's the denial of John Doe 2 it really is what told me this
Yeah,
is a conspiracy because I
yeah,
was like 17 at the time, right? And I had seen JFK, and that red pilled me. I saw that in the courtroom scene, and I started reading all the books. And so then Oklahoma City happens, and I'm on board with the official story. I'm following it every day. I want to know what's going on. And by June, when they turn around and they say that John Doe 2 doesn't exist, I was like picking my jaw up off the floor. I'm like, oh my God, this is an actual conspiracy. I'm watching it happen. It's unfolding. And it's as the years have gone by, the additional material we've gained has only furthered that belief. And anybody who reads Wendy Painting's fantastic book or Roger Charles and Andrew Gumbel's book, uh, so I think we'll walk away with the same conclusion. Now, there are some people who will say things like, "Oh, McVeigh's patsy, he's innocent," and this is really low
yeah,
information.
right,
Folks, maybe they just don't know enough about the case.
right. Um, okay. Let me see what else I had here. I forgot my second point. I had a second point.
My hope is one of these days those tapes are going to come out, but at the same time, I have current fears regarding things like AI, deep fakes. It would be possible theoretically for a tape to come out that only shows McVeigh on it with
That's
his
absolutely true, and that
yeah,
also opens up future events
right?
having this stuff is not gonna be possible, and I will tell you, on I used to really look into false flags, not like you are doing, but, like, I would just figure them out, just, as they happen, I had a radio show and then podcast, and I would just figure them out,
There you go.
and yeah, and then one time, I remember the moment that the internet ended, it was February 14th, 2018, it was the Parkland thing in Florida, and
Mhm.
I just couldn't do online research anymore. It was no longer possible. Everything was just mainstream media. And there would be 1,000. If you were on it, you could get 1,000 videos uploaded from people who were there. 1,000. And these were kids in a high school.
Mhm.
Nothing. So it completely shut down right then and there. So that was the first level of you can no longer kind of figure it out.
Oh yeah,
And I,
it's like
yeah.
curated and sanitized. Google
Yes,
it.
and I think they gave us the raw stuff before to make our generation, or the generation that spans you and me, to it was like when they had censors on movies. So they used to have censors on movies so you couldn't, like, show boobs or whatever because people didn't want them in their towns. So, like, "Oh, we'll put censors and then movies are fine." And they're like, "Okay, this is great." And then they took the censors off and now everybody has boobies in their town, whatever. So, this thing is that I think they got us to accept the internet into our homes.
Well, we had that credibility. We're like, "Oh, this is
Yeah, this
credible,"
is for
right?
us. Like, this
Yeah.
is us. This is our tool. This is decentralized and whatever. So I definitely think that the next level is going to be right, that they actually don't just block the information, they provide the false information and the
Fake information,
yeah.
that's right. That's a fear with, the when you see the tools available now with AI and deep fakes.
And what they're willing to do.
Oh,
They're
for
willing to
sure.
kill, lie, cover up, they're bold. They know by now that they can plug every leak. They can plug every leak. Nobody's getting out with original information. Um,
Well, I hold
yeah.
out hope for there being whistleblowers. I hold out hope too that things like it's so important that we have x.com/Twitter, just because when an event like this happens, the fastest moving news is there. You could have a person who's at this structural deep
Yeah.
event who filmed it, and they're going to put it on their Twitter. And this is not something you're seeking via Google, which curates and sanitizes everything. That's why it's so important we have that free speech, and why Elon Musk has done what he's done, which is a definite improvement over what we had before. Although there more could be done. But you're right; it's
You
not the
think
same
he's
world.
legit?
I've heard enough from people that
Not a chance
it's
in the
all
world.
it's like I have to say exactly, not a chance in the world, but I wanna give him props,
Yeah, yeah,
for
that's
some
great.
of the things that he has done, like to keep voices on there, like because I would be still perma-banned if
Yeah.
it weren't for him. Um,
And it's a good point to have Twitter because and I would never boycott anything that didn't throw me off first. Use it for as long as it lasts. And the more you use it, the more you activate these things, the more obvious it is when they're taking it away from you. And they have to like that's what I always say. If somebody yelled at me for saying, if Ron Paul were controlled opposition, I wouldn't even care because I like, that's great. If that's what they have to give me, that's great. But when they decided they only have to give me Trump, I'm like, oh,
right.
well,
We To your point about Musk, what's interesting that caught my eye is somebody was talking the other day and they were reciting off the list of how many times they were sending up, SpaceX was sending up rockets
hmm
to put satellites in orbit. And I was thinking about
blackjack.
that and I'm like, yeah, when that used to happen, when NASA did that, they had another payload. And that other payload was for the NRO. And those are spy satellites. And so it makes me
Oh,
wonder. I wonder what SpaceX has been doing since they're constantly putting satellites into orbit. I'm wondering if they might have like some kind of deal with the NRO as well to put their newer spy satellites in orbit.
have you
You
heard of
know,
blackjack? I haven't.
Blackjack.
Yeah, I haven't
Yeah,
looked into it at all. But what is that?
well, I've heard of a set of satellites that were called Blackjack that
Yeah, I
were
think he's
related.
putting them up.
Oh, okay.
Or
Um,
I could be wrong. I didn't look into it at all. I'm just saying somebody, like, tweeted
What
that
I
at
know
me.
is
I don't know.
there was the keyhole satellites, which KH-11, which you're talking like Hubble Space Telescope pointed at the Earth, right? And so it can see and actually view motion. There's like video capability, real time, digital.
Wow.
And so, like if you watch the movie Enemy of the State, what you see in that, like the satellite stuff,
Yeah,
that's kind of how it is for
that's
them
real.
now. Yeah, that's how it is now for them, for these
They
satellites.
tell you. I mean, I've had people go to whatever, some seminar or somebody visits one of my kids' classrooms and they say stuff like that. Like, you have no idea. Don't even bother. That's the other thing. Don't even bother trying to censor yourself because we can hear your thoughts, basically. No one ever said that, but I wouldn't be surprised. The thing I forgot was that they shut all the cameras off at 9:02.
It was what he said is, when 9:02 a.m. came around, none of the cameras, showed anything of any value. Meaning either there were some that were running, but they didn't show the Murrah building, or the ones that we want to see in question. They said that either the tape was being replaced at that very moment, or there was an error with the cameras, and we know that's those are excuses. Well,
Yeah.
another reason we know this is the Secret Service timeline. The Secret Service timeline is a timeline produced by the Secret Service, and in that timeline, it says there. X number of minutes and seconds after the bomb went off, the subjects can be seen exiting the Ryder truck, meaning it actually specifies exactly
Plural.
down to the minute and second
Yeah.
uh, after. The only way you know that is if you have a video with a timestamp on it, right? So how
Yeah,
do they
of
know
course. Yeah.
exactly how many minutes and seconds after they got out of the truck unless they could measure the
Right.
passage of time, which means they have video.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Wow. And boy, but we're always told like no one can ever keep that big a secret. It's like, well, if you can't, no one can hear you. And no one can hear you scratching on the inside of the coffin. Like you're not, it doesn't, you're keeping the secret. I would keep the secret. I have no secrets, but
Well,
anyone wanting me to
secrets
keep a
can be
secret,
kept.
I
We
would
have
definitely keep a secret.
counterintelligence for that. They do
Yeah.
their job, and yeah, you hear that one all the time. Nobody could be able to keep a secret. No, you'd be surprised what murder and threats will do.
Yes,
You
and
know.
it's obvious. That's why they let you see what they're doing. That's why there's a meme, Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself. Like they want you to know.
Yep.
So I had two more things and then I'll let you go. With when I read books like this, these are all I think here the only one we didn't mention that I heard you talk about was In Bad Company.
Yeah, in Bad Company.
Yeah,
That's a
by
good one.
Mark Ham, America's Terrorist Underground. So these books, all the books on my desk right now, uh, are worthwhile and I think legit, but quite often I'll buy a book that is, a little hinky, and I think, well, this is a limited hangout, this guy's a fad or whatever. I
Yep.
just wonder, in all of your investigation and in your opinion, do you think, what's your default state? Like, I'm sure that's a fad, or I'm gonna give it legit, or, both for authors, for, podcasters, for just the alt media in general. Like, how do you, and maybe you've even seen it change, and because you've been investigating this so long.
Yeah, what I try to do is just review the content, review the facts and what's being said. If you can, find out what their source is and examine that source for yourself and see if there's anything that's being excluded or left or omitted. And if there's anything that stands out to you as a red flag after you've examined that source and this person is omitting it or excluding it, then there's an agenda probably at play. Because a good reporter or a good researcher is not going to omit things to make their case, right?
Yes, yes,
And so
yes.
that I think is like my rule of thumb for whether it be current research or whatever. Look at what they're saying. Go look at the sources if you can. Get to that source material and try to review it. And that's kind of what I did with Oklahoma City with Roger providing me all these documents. I could go and review the sources he's talking about, and you can see that there. You mentioned like limited hangout books. There are with Oklahoma City. There's one that says Iraq did it. And they all
Yeah,
the
the final jihad.
well, yeah, that's right. It's written by the governor's brother before it happened. We have this book by Jana Davis called The Third Terrorist. And she just changes what I did is I read it and I'm seeing which witnesses she's talking about, but I noted that she changes all their names. So she changes their names to a fake name. So in the book, it's a phony name. And it makes me wonder, well, what else is she changing? And I noted she also is twisting the testimony of one witness to make him say things he didn't say. And I'm like, well, there's an agenda here. And come to
Yeah.
find out, sure enough, she has all these neocons behind her and all these CIA guys, and that was
Oh,
really weird.
interesting.
Yeah, like on Twitter, Boltzmann Booty, he identified like 8 different CIA officers who were pushing the Iraq did it angle, which is just stunning to me that it's either exploiting the current
Yeah,
situation
yeah.
to drive your own goals, or oh, we knew this is going to happen and this is intentional, right? One or the other, and it could have been
What do you
information
mean? What are you
exploitation.
saying? The
Well,
second
well,
one?
well, if you've got all these CIA guys saying, Iraq did it, are they just exploiting the
Yeah,
situation, saying we're going to use this to our
right.
benefit, or is it something more nefarious than that?
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, and I guess the connection is McVeigh was in Iraq, so maybe they're using that. Um, have you ever felt like you were targeted by someone giving you misinformation or warning you? Do you ever feel worried about
Oh, yeah, I've
talking
had that
about this
happen.
stuff?
Um, I definitely had someone approach me with some information that had I published it, it basically would have driven a wedge between one of the key um, victim advocates. She's now deceased, but her name was Janie Coverdale, and her son's name was Jeffrey Coverdale, and he was in the military, and he was at Fort Riley. And this witness was trying to say that this Jeffrey Coverdale was McVeigh's commanding officer and put him in for his gold star when he was over in Iraq. And so anyway, we take what this guy's given to me and myself, I kick it around, Roger looks at it, Wendy looks at it, and we find like 75% of the things he's saying are true, but then there's 25% that's total BS. We found out who Jeffrey Coverdale was. He was working at Fort Riley. He worked in media and communications. We found out where he works, everything, and we knew that he couldn't possibly have been the person
Mm,
that this guy was telling me he was. And now, had I ran with that, Janie Coverdale would have been really offended.
yeah,
So, oh,
yeah,
what my son put in McVeigh for a bronze
yeah.
star. So that's just one example why I had someone coming at me with a bogus story. And what I do know is Wendy's had same thing, dispatched people. Roger too. He did, and so that's one of the pitfalls and why you have to double check things and check sources and be careful, because that does happen still.
But they
I
gave up? I can't believe they gave up on you.
if
I mean,
someone is gonna
seriously, I'd
go
like
to
it I
all
worry.
that effort, right, it makes me wonder. Now, thankfully, I don't have, like, any news sources or anything, so I had nothing that I could look at and say, "Is that is that tainted? But it does make me think, yeah, this person who came at me, what was their goal? What was their intention? Did someone dispatch them? Well, what was he doing?
Yeah,
And
for
until I know
sure.
the answer to that question, it's hard for me to really think about it. I
Yeah.
just have to be on my toes, right?
Yes, and for now, like, what makes me not too worried is it seems to me that you stumble upon bodies and stuff when someone knows something firsthand or is particularly like well known or charismatic or influential. Like I think of Anthony Bourdain, like he was
Right.
just off the leash, man. Like I just could not be controlled. Uh so those are the two things that I think, well, as long as you're not hitting a certain level of
Right.
fame, or you
If
don't.
I could, if I, as long as I, yeah, as
Yeah,
long as I'm not
just
appearing
keep
on
keep your day
TV.
job, keep it all together. The last thing I want to say, I kept thinking, like, what can I come up with that Richard doesn't already know and talk about? I'm
Oh,
sure
believe me,
you
there's a
know it.
lot I don't know. A lot.
Well, but that I haven't. I mean, I've heard a lot of what you've talked about, and there were just a couple of things that I always look out for when I see some relic being dusted off to be in a new position in government. And Bill Barr is one of those guys.
Oh
People are like,
man.
oh, he's rock solid. I'm like, I think he did Waco and Ruby Ridge, if I'm not mistaken, but
Yeah.
rock solid. Yeah, right. Drain that swamp. And so Merrick Garland, when he was up for Supreme Court justice, I mean, if I see OKC, I'm like, that guy is getting paid back for whatever he did. And he showed up. I have this thing in the 1990s. So now he's attorney general. In the 90s, Garland was working for the Clinton administration as Deputy Attorney General Jamie Garelick's principal associate deputy attorney general, whatever. In that role, Garland supervised several high profile domestic terrorism cases, I would say, cover ups,
Yep.
including the Oklahoma City bombing, the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski, and the Atlanta Olympics bombing, which they completely messed up.
Absolutely.
And he said Garland arrived in Oklahoma City within 48 hours of the bombing and personally handled some of the early legal proceedings and later oversaw the prosecution efforts that led to Timothy McVeigh's 97 conviction.
That's absolutely true, and I urge everyone to read the preliminary hearing, which is the first hearing held with the government against McVeigh. Merrick Garland did the oral arguments in that. The transcripts on the Libertarian Institute at libertarianinstitute.org/OKC. And this preliminary hearing was April 24th. Merrick Garland, as I said, is the chief. He's the guy. He's the attorney, and he is strenuously objecting anytime the witness is asked about the surveillance tapes or John Doe 2. However, his witness, John Hersley, did admit under oath that their witness saw two. He said there were two individuals in the truck. McVeigh was the driver. That's his exact quote from that hearing. But no doubt about it, Merrick Garland tried to limit that as much as he could. He jumped up out of his chair and objected.
Really?
Um, when he the witness was asked, how many people did your witness say was in the truck? He objected to that. He said it doesn't matter whether there are 1 or 100 people. Timothy McVeigh is the one who's on trial here today. The judge overruled him, overruled, and then that's when the witness says there were two people inside the truck. Mr. McVeigh was the driver. And just reading that preliminary hearing blew me away. When I saw that, I thought, well, yeah, Merrick Garland certainly did. I see why they've
Yeah.
nominated him as SCOTUS. He
Yes,
thinks
right.
he earned this.
Yeah, and they couldn't get it, so they got him AG instead. So I immediately looked
Yep.
up Brett Kavanaugh. I was like, was Brett Kavanaugh there? But he did the Vince Foster cover up.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, so that's why they made all that sex stuff up for him during his whatever anointing or whatever, because
To,
they didn't want to
to
get to the real stuff, which is he was a Clinton shill being put up by Republicans. And then the
fascinating.
other, yeah, and then the other thing, one I'm sure you know, and one you didn't know, was David Chipman was Biden's ATF director pick. Did not,
Okay.
I believe he did not get passed.
They,
And
right,
yep.
right.
And it says Chipman responded to two of the highest profile terrorist attacks of the 90s. Funny how, like, these guys who are stationed not in New York or Oklahoma were both there. The bombing of the World Trade Center in New York City in 93 and the blast 2 years later in Oklahoma City that killed 168 people. He was sent to Waco after the disastrous ATF raid on the Branch Davidian compound to assist the trial team in the aftermath. The trial team. So these guys are still getting their payola.
That's right. They're trying to earn their chits and trade them in for positions of power, and that's what you see. Um, Among those people, one of the only ones that I've seen that didn't do that, that he basically, it seems like he was paid off. He was given early retirement and full pay for so many years of service. When that was Danny Colson, founder of the hostage rescue team. And if people go and he was on this case as a lead agent, but he was taken off of it midway through.
Yeah.
And I believe it's because he was a guy who was very upset the way
Yeah.
it was going.
Not gonna go all the way.
Yeah.
That's why I sent you that article today of a guy who was on my radar for a very long time. His name is Donald Sachtleben, and I remember it was like 10 years ago, there was this big scandal in the Obama administration that they were looking at reporters' emails, and they were trying to find this whistleblower who blew up the second underwear bomber, who was an MI6 agent.
Okay.
No, and I think
Reed, I think, was
the
or
first
Reed was
one
the
was
first one.
free. Yeah, and
Okay.
I don't know what his story was, but and I think it was the same Yemeni bomb maker, so I assume the first one was an inside job. I actually there was a lot of witness testimony, like the guy didn't have a passport, they got him on the plane anyway, something like that. He was accompanied by guys in suits with ties and just
Mhm.
waved through security. That was the first time, but the second time there was an MI6 agent who was getting this bomb and he was going to do it again on the plane. And this Donald Sachtleben was the whistleblower, and they turned over every rock to find this guy, apparently.
They were
And
calling him a leaker, they were viewing it as
yes,
damaging leak, right? And,
yes.
yeah, this article kinda blew
You
me
read
away.
it. Did you
Yeah, I
read the
did.
article I sent you? Oh, yeah.
I
Okay.
did, yeah.
Yeah. So they, and I haven't actually read it in a long time, so maybe you can correct me. But what they did with him, I suspect. Oh, so when they were going to arrest him, by what the New York Times called a quote bizarre
Bizarre
coincidence,
coincidence.
they happened to find like millions of kitty porn pictures on his laptop, or where they were doing a parallel investigation of him, which I'm sure was because they knew it was him the whole time or
That's
whatever.
right.
And my feeling was, because then I further looked, that he was a bomb specialist who was on the scene at OKC. And my feeling, a suspicion of mine, is that he knew they were going to take down a plane, and he
Okay.
didn't want. He felt bad about what he knew about OKC, and he knew that they would do it. When he found out this guy was making a bomb, they probably asked for his advice or
Right,
to help.
and he probably knew they're gonna let this go through. He
Yes,
probably
that's what I
thought
think.
that. Yeah. And you certainly that's
So
a
he
way
went to jail.
you could neutralize someone, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's the kind of neutralization that would be effective. You don't have to murder someone, you could just do that. Someone has mentioned something similar to me, the Vegas, shooter, like his brother, Paddock's brother,
Mhm.
um, same thing happened with him, and some people have said, "I don't know that that material was his." Like, it seems like this was to shut him up or something.
The only thing I know about the Vegas thing is I saw a documentary, a gal, I forget her name. It was just 90 minutes of there were, many shooters in Vegas that night. Different
Right.
casinos all over the place. That whole thing, I don't know what the guns were for. I will probably never know that story, but
It's like he was trying to
yeah.
do a transaction or
Yeah.
something, a sale.
Yeah, they can take you
Um,
out. Son of Sam, what they did with him was, when he joined the cult, because it was a satanic thing, like, people think that was a lone wolf thing, he was absolutely in a coven. It
that's
was
right, yeah.
could have been MK Ultra or something. I don't, man, you're up on everything, Richard.
I watched this documentary. I thought
Oh,
it was I followed
yeah,
the same course you did. I was so engrossed by it.
yeah,
I got Maury Terry's book like you, and
yeah,
I read it. I
yeah.
didn't buy 100% of the stuff in it, like about Manson 2, and you'll see that when you get
I
to
didn't finish it yet.
yeah,
I'm
when you
only
get to
halfway
that,
through.
you'll see what I'm talking about. But that documentary, yeah, we watch probably similar things,
Yeah, it was
you know?
absolutely fascinating. So you remember that they made him give pictures of his family
Oh, okay.
when he
It's
got
like,
there, and they said, we'll just kill your family. Like, you can say whatever you want. We won't even kill you, but we're gonna kill your family." And he felt bad for them. They were so nice to him.
well, this is one reason why Terry Nichols has not said a whole lot because he fears for his son and his daughter his family, because he said what is in the FBI documents from interviews with Terry Nichols conducted in, I want to say it was 2010, maybe it was 2011, but he said that he knows the identity and he knows the name of John Doe number two, that he's not going to say it because it's not one of the names that's been mentioned thus far, and he fears for his family's safety. And he said that several times.
Yeah.
He knows others were involved, but he hasn't gone beyond Roger Moore because he fears for their safety because they could be,
Yeah.
you could get to them,
He's right. And what good is it gonna do anyway?
right?
What good would it possibly do? So I
Well,
don't.
we'll all say, "See, I told you so," I guess, but
We will add that to the stack of things that we try to tell normies when they go to vote. Like, it's not going to matter.
yeah.
I'm not making fun of people who vote. I actually, I do. Well, when I first moved to California, I did like actually try to figure out who I wanted to vote for. And we went and we voted, actually just put a piece of paper in like a cardboard box or whatever, or a post office box. And I mean, every single solitary person I voted for lost. So it's like, oh, right. I'm in California. Why bother?
Yeah.
But in any case, when it gets to this level stuff, I mean, Republicans, Democrats, they're all doing it. That's why the guy probably called this book. You guys made fun of the name of the book about the secret life of Bill Clinton, but this was on Clinton's watch. Biden brags about the Patriot Act.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
The Patriot Act, it was Clinton's watch. It very much pivoted. The Oklahoma City bombing's an inflection point in history where we pivoted away from the Cold War and towards domestic threats.
Yeah. Yes. They did need to replace the Cold War.
That's
That's
right.
right. We did need to do that. Well, we could just go on. And I am sure, I mean, only because you talk about this all the time, but I have been really looking forward to talking to you. And anything you ever want to talk about, or more of this, or whatever, I would love to explore. Somebody had a question. What do you think about the work of Chris Emery and his partner, whose name escapes me? That's Mark's question.
So Chris Emery, he was the narrator on a documentary called "A Noble Lie" about the bombing. I
Oh,
know he was involved with the production of that documentary. I haven't seen any other material that he has put out after that, though.
how do you
So
like that documentary?
I like parts of it. I think are very strong. Wendy Painting wrote it, and it
Oh, she
shows
did?
she's a co-writer for it. Yep,
Oh,
she
okay.
co-wrote
Because
it.
I've been on a screen with the director, like he's
What
been in a group podcast
Okay.
that
Yeah, what
he's on.
happened there is some things were, there's a group. So some of Wendy's things I think were probably overridden maybe because you had James Lane, I think the producer with Free Mind Films, you had Chris Emery, so you had other hands in the mix. But I believe the strong parts of that probably come from her work because she really did a lot of work on it.
Well, it turns I had never even thought about Oklahoma City bombing, and I watched The Noble Lie, and I was like, "Oh, there's definitely something there." I mean, we
Yeah.
go through these phases. If my the scales were completely off my eyes, I wouldn't have needed it. But those are eye-opening events, even if they don't always tell the whole story. I don't know, but Paranautica either is giving us a shout out or would like a shout out.
Shout out to Paranautica podcast.
Thank you. The government, Scott says the government running the terrorist playbook. Don't forget TWA 800 for sure. And the Amtrak derailment. I'm not familiar with that one, but
Now
you can send
that's
me
an
that.
interesting one. There was
Oh,
a,
is
a train a train was derailed. It's still unsolved today. It
it?
happened in Arizona. It was the fall of 1995. At the same time stuff
Oh,
about the surveillance tapes is coming up in the news on Oklahoma City bombing. Well, this train gets derailed in Arizona. It's called the Sunset Limited. And what happened there is that pulled hundreds of case agents off of the OK bomb investigation. So you have this allocation of resources where these investigators out on the West Coast are being pulled away from OK bomb to investigate split rail, which is what the FBI called the Sunset Limited. Their case was called split rail. And some of the investigators, we believe that this may have been an effort on whoever it was behind the intelligence group that was behind penetrating the sting operation may have done the train derailment to get case agents pulled away from something they were getting too close to.
I absolutely would not put that past them. That is so interesting, man. This story has so many details. It's amazing. And going the aberration stuff, white supremacist stuff back there and all that those networks. I'm really interested. What should I read next?
I say do the Silent Brotherhood,
Okay.
because when you read that, you're totally going to be like, I understand,
Okay. Okay.
like the people active at the time of the Oklahoma City bombing, those terrorists, and whether we're talking genuine or even agent provocateurs, because you understand the FBI did put together fake groups, that have these same ideologies. So you very much have players that are both real and fake. But yeah, that book gave me so much insight. I can't say enough good about it.
Yeah, okay, I will because I'm so far down the rabbit hole that I always think everything is fake, and I'll tell you the few times when I don't think it's fake are the times I'm wrong. Like,
Mhm.
so I can't, and it makes me
I
useless because
sympathize. I
yeah, there's like
sympathize.
no discernment necessary anymore. 10 years ago, when I was in my prime, I was like, people would ask me, "Is it real or fake?" I'm like, "Fake, real, fake." But now it's like everything's fake. Make me a cocktail. So, I'm done. Um, Undefined JB said, "Monica, did you experience the earthquake?" And that's that ding was I asked my friend, I was on a walk with my friend. This was just like an hour ago. It made national news. So I don't know if you guys have seen this yet. I was on a walk with my friend, and my husband texted me and said, there was this massive earthquake. The house was shaking, the strongest one I ever felt. And I was right where the center of it was. But
Oh, wow.
because I was in my car, I didn't feel it. And I had just dropped my friend off, and she said, yeah, she felt it. It was massive. And they
Wow.
say that about cars. You don't.
Like the suspension or something. I'm
Yeah.
in Reno, Nevada, and I can feel aftershocks here. There have been two times in the 20 plus years I've been here that like the bookshelf like
Yeah.
moved, and like the
Hmm.
floor, it feels like it jerked. I was
Yeah.
like, okay, what the hell is that?
Yeah.
I'm from
Earthquake.
Oklahoma,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
They're cool.
earthquake.
They're cool and horrible. They kill people, but like
Yeah.
they're so cool. I just love them. I'm bummed I missed it, but I didn't feel it at all, which is amazing because I mean, you're rarely at the center of it, and I couldn't have been 1 mile from the center of it, but that just shows to go. Also, my car has a little bit of a rough ride. So anyway, too much information. Um, Cat Duckness said, "This has been outstanding. Thanks so much." And on that note, let me ask Richard, first of all, thank you, of course. And also, please tell people where to find all your work and what else you want them to know, do, how they to follow you or support you, anything you got.
Sure, sure. And thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
I
It's been
made you go over, though. I feel bad. I'm
That's
sorry.
totally okay.
Okay,
No, it's
okay,
been a
good,
great discussion,
fine,
and
fantastic.
folks,
Thank you.
they can find my stuff. I have a Substack where I publish my essays. Sometimes they're published in Garrison Magazine, other times by the Libertarian Institute. But if you go to richardbooth.substack.com, it's also linked on my Twitter profile, which is Booth_OKC. On Twitter, I talk about not just Oklahoma City, but other stuff. But yeah, if you're interested in the research, just go to the Substack or go to libertarianinstitute.org/OKC, where you can get thousands of news clippings on this case, primary source documents, transcripts, the evidence you need to be able to read it and see, yeah, there's more here than what we've been told.
Yeah, that is awesome stuff. And I love your interviews. I love when you talk to Scott and William, the History Homos podcast. And I heard a series that you did with No Way Jose,
Oh, right.
where man, that was thorough. So I'll put some of those links in the show notes at monicaperezshow.com if people want to hear more about it. I'll write the names of these books that we were talking about. I've got them all stacked right here. Aberration in the Heartland of the Real was great. Silent Brotherhood, I'm going to do next. And would you recommend if in my Jim Keith series, do you think I should include this in my Jim Keith series when I read his stuff on the air?
I
It's
probably
too old.
wouldn't. I
Yeah.
wouldn't put it on a list of like, hey, these are essential Oklahoma City bombing books. But like, if you're talking about him on the air, for sure, that's an old school, and he really was
Yeah.
a old school researcher.
Yeah.
Why leave it off?
Yes. Okay. I'll put it all in there. All right. Thank you so much. I'm going to ask you to just hang on until we are totally finished to make sure that I have your recording uploaded because you're recording separately. And I am. Thank you so much for listening. This is Monica Perez.